So here's us on the Raggedy Edge. Welcome to episode 4 of So Here's Us on the Raggedy Edge. I'm your host, Matthew Broyles. For my guest today is an actress, activist, and lots of other things, as we all contain multitudes. You might have seen her, Friday Night Lights. You might have seen her in Boyhood. I found out from doing research that we actually share a credit, and that we were both in Walker, Texas Ranger back in the day.
Anyway, You're not old enough to be in Walker, Texas Ranger.
it ran a long time. So this is Libby Villari. She is currently touring with a production called Anne. Tell us a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, first of all, I'm not exactly touring.
Well, I mean, I've seen you around lots of places, but
But I did recently do one evening of it as a fundraiser for Kamala Harris and Jim Walker.
Yes.
And I did this way back in, I guess it was 2018. I did this for Beto, and I did many shows for him, maybe 9 or 10. Yeah. And I raised about $20,000 for him. And we raised $10,000 the other night just in one show. So
that's awesome.
Yes, it really is that I'm able to contribute like that, you know.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that I have carte blanche to do this show anywhere I want to from the playwright, Holland Taylor, because she is a political animal like myself and like Anne was. And she loves that I did that. You know, we've got a truck full of furniture. We're going to do a play. It was really, we winged it everywhere we went. And and we would do it. We did it in little tiny spaces and great big spaces and churches. And what else did we work? At conferences. We did it everywhere that they would have us. So anyway, I'm super familiar with the play.
Yeah. So when we say Anne, some of our listeners might not know we're referring to Ann Richards, who was the former governor of Texas. She was governor when I was in high school. And so I'm just old enough to remember when Texas was not a solid Republican state. And I think that's a lot of people tend to forget that. We tend to think of Texas and we go, oh, well, it's always been red, but that is not the case. And Ann Richards was a particularly well-known governor at the time, who very much took on, you know, at the time was the Bush administration, the Bush 1. And so when you were doing this part, I assume you're probably watching a lot of Ann Richards videos. Preparing.
You know, I did. But after I did that, I approached it from my own.
Okay.
So she was my hero. So I was very lucky to play her. She was my hero for a couple of reasons. She was a feminist, and I had been a feminist since 1969, when I was a young woman, a teenager actually, and I had been into politics since then. So when I moved to Texas, she wasn't even in politics when I moved to Texas. I got her in 1975. So, but anyway, she is the person who brought the television and film industry to Texas. And so she is responsible for my career, really. and for the industry here. So she's not only my hero, but she is everybody who works in the industry. When she became governor, I think it was her second year, I made about 7 films, and which is unheard of in this state.
Right.
And so she smoothed with all the Hollywood types who were mostly Democrats. And when she was doing her fundraising for running for governor, and they just loved her, you know. So yeah, if you're in the film business or the television or even gaming, because gaming followed the film and television industry,
yes,
here to Texas, and so if you're in any of those things, you can thank Ann Richards.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because that was, I guess now. 94, I guess, was when she got unseated by W, something like that.
Right.
So 30 years now that we've kind of been in the wilderness.
There's not been a Democratic governor since Ann.
No.
Yeah.
And so a lot of your aim with doing shows like this to raise money for, for the national candidates, I would imagine that the hope is that it trickles down to not to use that word, but to some of the
trickle down economies don't work, but yes,
some of the
trickle down the word pound does work. Yeah.
To some of the folks who are running statewide or at least or locally even, because it's
I did that as well back in 2018, but I haven't done that this year. Because I am not as young as I used to be, and it took all the energy and in the world from my team and I. My husband is my producer, and a local actress that used to work at Hip Pocket years and years and years ago, named Lori McGowan.
Yes,
she plays my secretary when I'm doing it around here. I did it for the Zach Theater in Austin, and there was a tremendous success there. And that's thanks to Holland. They wanted her to do it, and she said, "No, you need to hire Libby Villari."
Nice.
And then I did it at the Dallas Theater Center right after that run. So I'm pretty familiar with her life in general, and Holland has helped me immensely in that regard because she did so much research when she was writing Anne.
Yeah.
And so. The Democratic Party ran the state of Texas for the longest time.
Yes.
But it wasn't the best. It wasn't the brightest of the Democratic Party necessarily. We were racist. The Democrats in Texas and in the South were basically a racist party. And thankfully, we switched.
Yeah. Well, that's too
bad that we have to have one of those at all, but we seem to.
That's that alignment that kind of happened, around about that time where a lot of, you can trace it back to LBJ, signing the Civil Rights Act. But
that's exactly right. That's when the Democrats turned on.
Yeah, but it took a while. It took a while for them all to filter over that way, and I guess by the time we hit the 90s, it was already in full swing. But it's one of those things where, even that said, though, like Ann Richards, she was not. Maybe she sort of straddled that line between sort of being a business friendly, Democrat, but also certainly not racist,
No, she wasn't. But she would tell you that her parents were.
Right.
Because she was brought up in that good old boy world.
Of course.
Her dad was one of those good old boys, you know. So, and he used the word, the N word,
right.
But this is a really cool thing about my being so involved with Anne the play and the woman is because the exact same thing that happened to her when she realized that the world was a much bigger place than this little tiny town called Lakeside outside of Waco. The same exact thing happened to me.
Oh.
So I'll just tell you about it real quickly.
Yeah.
When her father was, and this is all in the play, as a matter of fact. When she was 11, her father, the big war happened, and Japan had already entered it, and And so her dad got drafted into the Navy, and he got stationed in San Diego. And he'd been there for a few months. And as she tells it in the play, Mama and I just couldn't stand it. So Mama yanked me out of school, killed every chicken we had, canned them all, canned everything in the garden, wedged us in all our belongings and the old worn-out Chryslers we had, and lit out for California. And so the exact same thing happened to me. It wasn't because somebody got drafted, but my mother had an abusive husband. So my father was very abusive, especially toward me. And my mother ran away from him and took her 4 children to California. At exactly the same age as Anne went.
Oh wow!
And so my mother had enough sense, and I don't know how or why, but she knew that the racism that she was surrounded with in the tiny town of North Carolina, where I come from, wasn't right. And her parents would make the black farmhands come in the back door, and she was not about to do that.
Yeah.
And she found out when she was trying to escape my dad that our mammy helped her pull that together and do that and get us on a train so that my dad didn't know we were leaving for good. He just thought we were going to my grandparents for Thanksgiving because my grandparents had just moved to Southern California. My grandfather had terrible asthma from the textile mills.
Oh.
Couldn't breathe, and they said, if you want to live any length of time at all, you need to move to Tujunga, California, which is right outside Los Angeles. So the same thing happened to me. And once you're surrounded by all colors of people, and they are, as Anne says, they're just like me.
Right. Yeah. I had a similar experience. I moved to New York, shortly after college, and it did, from growing up in West Texas, there wasn't a lot of diversity, and it took me a while to figure out.
So where were you, Lubbock or something?
I was in Weatherford, just out west of here.
In Weatherford.
Yeah.
That's where I went to junior college.
Yes, I went to Weatherford College, and I was in theater out there. And
what year did you go there?
I was 92 through 94.
Okay.
So that was still Anne period, I think.
Yes, it was. It was right, right smack in the middle of it.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was definitely one of those things where I do think it's important to get out of your town sometimes, because I know folks who didn't and kind of are just sort of frozen in time in a lot of ways, because that's the only thing they know. And I've always been
go ahead.
I was just saying, I've always sort of been terrified of that happening to me, where I kind of,
And you made sure it didn't.
Yeah, but I just kind of ossify.
I think we would both agree that our lives would have been very different.
Oh, gosh.
Had we not had these moves.
It would have been, it wouldn't have been anywhere close. And I think, someone like Anne, I think probably that would have been probably the same, I mean, she would have had she might have just settled into some of those old assumptions that everybody had.
You know what? It's certainly possible, but she was such a unique character and a political animal when it didn't make any sense for a woman to be.
That was the other thing, is that for women to be that active in politics at that time was still relatively unusual.
At this point in her campaign for governor, she was 10 points behind at this point. And, we only have 3 weeks to go to the election. So, but Clayton Williams, he just stopped shooting himself in the foot, right? Right. And he was the one who actually said, look, if rape is like the weather. If you can't do anything about it, just lay back and enjoy it.
Right. And it's so funny now because you think about it and you think, I don't even know if that would get him kicked out at this point, I mean, our
Oh, surely it would have. But, he said that in May of that campaign. Yeah. I believe it was. Oh, it was not the single thing that,
no,
that caused her to win. But he kept doing things like that.
Oh, yeah.
Saying things like that. And this good old boy attitude still lives here in our politics today.
It does.
And now it is Christian nationalism. that we have to contend with here.
Right.
Not just misogyny,
right,
but literally somebody who wants to overthrow the government for their religious beliefs. It's just nuts.
And I guess I had an idealist thing in my head when I was younger, because, we would have Klan rallies on the square and stuff like that even back then. And
yes.
Yeah, and I had it in my head that, well, eventually these people are going to die off, right? And then we won't have all of this. But it seems like every time we get a batch of the racists die off and whatnot, we just get a new crop. And it doesn't ever seem like we get to the end of it. And the same thing with, there's a lot of these like Andrew Tate types who are pushing sort of that for that old school, masculinity. And it feels like we're going back. And that concerns me because I had always hoped that we would sort of transcend that. In a lot of ways we have. But the fact that we're still having the argument about, for instance, whether women have control over their bodies, that's still disconcerting sometimes.
It's frankly nuts.
Yeah.
I started joining huge rallies and marches when I was 20, I guess, and my first politician that I worked for was George McGovern in California,
mm-hmm.
and it was ugly. I mean, the people that were there protesting against us and the pro-lifers and such, they were ugly. And then when I first moved to Texas, the moral majority was established, And there was a time, and I know this is, I want people to fact check me if they hear this and they go, there's no way. There was a time when churches and right-wing people in general, but especially right-wing evangelicals, didn't care one bit about abortions. They could have cared less.
Yes.
And you were doing drugs, and you were, good riddance to those babies.
Right.
And one of the moral majority leaders decided, in this good old boy club that existed nationally, not just in our state,
right?
They decided to make this a wage issue.
Yeah.
And so little by little, they worked to do that. And I have family members who are Southerners, and they're, now they are right-wing Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
And they, when they were young, they were at church camps where they were given dolls to pull apart.
Oh, wow.
And put blood all over these dolls with paint, and stuff, to show them to show these young kids what happened when a baby was aborted, and, which has not ever been the truth.
No.
And isn't the truth to this day. But once they took that route, people were horrified. Oh, my God. And why would they disbelieve them?
Right.
Yeah,
and that's
disbelieve anything else they said in church.
Right. And that's the thing that has ended up happening is somehow, the Republicanism, or really to a certain extent Trumpism now, has sort of become synonymous with the church, which is ironic to me because I'm just old enough to remember when that wasn't the case. Like you would have churches often tried to keep themselves at least somewhat separate from,
right.
And it feels
Jimmy
like
Carter's a perfect example of that.
Yeah, exactly. And he's right. And gosh, was he 100 years old now? Or he's going to be.
No, he did. He
finally did.
Yeah. Yes. Uh-huh.
And that's, of course, he was, president when I was younger. And that sort of Christian was the sort of Christian that, for instance, my grandmother was. My grandmother was very much about soup kitchens and, Meals on Wheels and things like that. And just helping people. And she really didn't go around just spouting about who was bad and who was going to go to hell. Like I never heard that from her, but she was extremely devout. I mean, she was a very, very hardcore Baptist, but never.
My grandmother as well. Same thing.
Yeah. Uh-huh. And so I saw examples of, okay, well, this is one way to be religious. And then increasingly you get people who say, well, no, the way to be religious is to stamp out the non-believers. And that's a little more like the old school, like the Crusades type of situation, where
Oh yeah.
You're not trying to spread the religion by persuasion. You're trying to do it through domination, and I worry that that's the path we're on right now.
Now, have you heard of Michael Flynn's?
Yes.
Just a couple of days ago. Do you keep up with politics like I do?
Oh yeah.
Or is this?
Yeah. Unfortunately.
Okay. So and he's basically talking about executing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Enemies of Donald Trump.
And he's not the only one. There's a lot of folks who are pushing that narrative. And if you look into this stuff like Project 2025, there's a lot of punishments being suggested for people who aren't attending church. And, that gets us into The Handmaid's Tale pretty quickly,
Absolutely.
And that's the kind of thing. It's the kind of thing that, every few years we always hear, well, this is the most important election of your lifetime. But unfortunately, here lately, it kind of always has been, because.
But don't you sort of believe that this is somewhat different?
Well, it's kind of like 2016 Part 2. When you think about it, 2016 was probably the most important one. But now we're getting the repeat, and to a certain degree. But now we know more about what happens when we get a fascist in office, and the fact that and
he had more good people in place, not good people, but for him, good people in place than he ever did back then.
And that's the concern now, is that they've learned their lessons this time around, or that last time around, and so this time they'll already have the machinery in place to make sure that a Mike Pence or somebody doesn't hold up the train, and that's one of those things that makes you. And people get tired of hearing this, but I mean, it really, you can't rebuild it once it's broken,
That's right.
So if we, and I don't feel, I'm not even particularly a partisan person, but I do recognize that when you have one candidate who's talking about basically unmaking the Constitution, almost any alternative is preferable to that.
Right.
But the fact that we're up against, not only in this election, we're up against sort of institutional racism, but also institutional sexism with the other candidate. It's very concerning to me, especially living in Texas.
It's so unsettling, because we are going backwards, or we will be going backwards if he gets elected, and he already took us back. And then, Roe v. Wade was shot down. Yeah. And women here in Texas, as you know, their lives are at risk. And doctors can go to prison for life if they help a woman who's miscarrying. So it's a big deal. It's not, but I just heard that the abortion issue is at the top of the reason to vote as of yesterday.
Well,
I was wondering when that was going to happen, or if it was going to happen. And this is not because women, want everybody to have abortions.
No.
It has nothing to do with that. It needs to be the woman's decision. Now, here's what I think, and I want to put this out there for you, listeners of yours who haven't maybe thought through this. I believe that every child born should be a wanted child. Mm-hmm. And if you are so wrapped up in your religion that you think you're killing a baby, well, where exactly do you think these fetuses go? They go straight to Jesus, for God's sake.
Right.
That is where they go. And if they are being born to a homeless person, if they are being born to a drug addict, if they are being born to a mentally unstable woman, they're facing a lifetime of pain and hunger and challenges so big that they might not be able to overcome them. And I want people to think about that.
That's all.
Children in this position, and I don't see anybody. I don't see any of my relatives. I don't see any acquaintances that have adopted a child. To fix this situation.
Right. And that's the thing we get, is that when we talk about pro-life, we're mostly talking about pro-birth. Because once the kid is born, there's not a lot of resources being, advocated for, and that
certainly not here.
No.
It's not in the South at all.
Right. And that's
how far you have to go to get service.
Yeah. And so when we're talking, I found myself in the weird position of like, when I'm making this late in the year, this late in 2024, when people say, hey, do you want to do such and such in November? I find myself pausing a little bit and going, well, let's just see how all this is going to work out before we start making plans.
Does that mean that you might be in Belize?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things where you're like, is that really a thing I'm going to have to concern myself? Because we don't know what's going to, like, for even if the Orange Emperor loses, there's still going to be there's going to be a lot of people making a lot of trouble. And
yes, there will. That's right. There will be,
and especially down here, because we've got, his crew is in charge, in this state. But I don't know. Do you find yourself thinking about like, oh, what happens?
Yes. Yes, we talk a lot about where we're going to go.
Yeah.
We don't feel like we could stay in Texas.
Right.
If he wins, because and we're not sure there's going to be another election. So,
right. and it's so crazy to be talking like that, but I do, it's hard not to think of it that way.
But I've talked to many friends like this, and they're thinking the same thing. But I did have a conversation about 2 weeks ago with a dear friend who is has the most integrity of I think anybody I know, and he said, "Well, see, I think exactly opposite of that. I think we've got to stay here and fight. We've got to get our country."
And that's what I ultimately did. In 2016, my first instinct was, well, I need to get out. But then I had those conversations with friends like, no, actually, now is the time that you need to be here. Now is the time that you need to be.
Is that what you arrived at? So,
yeah.
Well, it really struck me, and it hit home. And I thought, I honestly thought my protest days were done, but my husband and I are out on the street every time there's a protest in Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be 73 next month. But it's my job.
Yeah.
It's everybody's job if they really want to keep their democracy. And that's how serious I believe it is. I can hear that with you too. You believe it's that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm in a position where, I have, as a straight white man, I don't come under as much of the jurisdiction of a lot of these policies as but there's other people in my lives, women, LGBTQ people, folks who are friends of mine, that they are feeling it. They're feeling it every day, and they're feeling that those crosshairs just zeroing in on them. And that, to me, is intolerable, that they should have to. And, of course, me, it's sort of guilt by association if I'm supporting them. So, but
you're right. Sure.
But but again, is the solution to then run off and leave them to fight the battle by themselves? Or is the solution, or is it to try to provide some sort of assistance? We may have to leave Texas.
Yeah. I don't want you to feel like that, but we may have to leave Texas.
Yeah, no, it's occurred to me.
And I don't want to.
No, I don't want to either.
I'm not glad I'm here right now, but I've been here for 45 years, and I have a beautiful home on Eagle Mountain Lake, and I don't want to leave my home.
Well, and my thing is,
I'm not sure we can stay.
Well, and it's always that thing. When people tell me if I don't like it to get out, I'm like, look, I was born here. Like, this place belongs to me just as much as it belongs to you. So I don't know.
Yeah, they do not have a corner on patriotism and democracy.
Right.
And every time we go march at a rally or a march, we started taking a big American flag, which we use on the set of Anne. And a couple of people have said, "What is that doing here? Why are you celebrating our government?"
Right.
I'm celebrating our country.
Right.
Our country. And I am a patriot just as much as any Republican.
Right.
Maybe even more so, because I see through this loser, and I can't condone his presence in politics and the people he brings with.
Yeah. And that's what concerns me is that one day this guy's going to die, but what's going to happen is all these people that he's brought up in his wake are still going to be here. And
that's what my husband says. He says, Trumpism is not going away, even if we defeat him this time.
And I feel like
he'll be too old to run next time.
Yeah, because I feel like it's always kind of been there, waiting in the wings. It's just that they kind of needed an avatar to awaken it. And because a lot of these folks are people I went to school with. I know why they are that way, but it's not. I think without somebody to give them permission to just be their worst selves, they won't do it. But now they have this person who's like, no, you should be,
Right, exactly. There's no barriers. I'll let you know when there's a barrier.
Yeah, right.
Otherwise,
and so far,
and they're talking about bringing the military in to oversee the Capitol on January 6th, 2025.
Yeah.
Well, I'm all for the Guard coming in to keep the peace, but the military.
Well,
and thank God that didn't happen last time.
And that was the deal. Well, and that was the deal. Is it was suggested. It was suggested. Well, let's bring the military in. But the problem, and I think part of why it didn't happen is because at the time the Joint Chiefs and certainly Milley were going, no, we're not going to do that, and what
Thank God.
Yeah, and I think probably this time around that sort of attitude probably prevails too. But you always worry about the day when it doesn't, because that's when you look at other countries that have had coups. You have to have the military. If you don't have the military, the coup does not succeed.
Don't succeed. That's exactly right.
And that's one thing that Trump was missing back then, was that he just did not have the military's full support. And
yes, that's going on behind the scenes right now. You're exactly right.
And I'm certainly hoping
the appointments he makes this time are going to be quite different
than
he made last time.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that is just like, let's just not give him another crack,
So while we're talking about him, there's something I want to say to your listeners.
Sure.
I keep seeing people that I know are reasonable people who think logically. I keep seeing them on social media saying, well, my bills were a lot cheaper 4 years ago, so I'm voting for Trump. People, it isn't that simple.
Right.
The inflationary bubble that came as a result of the pandemic
yes, exactly.
was global. Not just here, global.
Right.
And Joe Biden brought it from 9.1% down to the other day, it was 2.1%. Yep. Now it's gone back up to 3, but it's not 9 anymore. And he's the only country leader in the world who has managed to pull that off. So think about that, people, before you think, oh, well, I don't like Trump, but my bills were cheaper. I paid $2.50 for gas the other day.
Yeah.
That's pretty damn cheap. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And talking about the cost of eggs, give me a break. I paid $1.75 for eggs the other day as well. So all of these, and I recognize and I understand that we have got to do something for the middle class and the lower middle class, wanting to vote for Trump because they don't know any better. We must address those issues of equal pay and housing. And price gouging, because that's what's going on now.
But then we have to.
He is not the only one who. Why in the world would Trump even want to fix that?
But that's the other thing is, you can say, all right, well, all of these things are still issues. I don't know why anybody thinks he's going to be the one to fix them, because he didn't fix them when he was in office. So.
Yeah, exactly. But he and I'll say this. Both he and Biden are not responsible for the inflation that took over our country. It was world economics, and the fact that we are in such good shape now. And we have to admit Biden has done a great job, and in my opinion. But it's going to take a while for the things that he has managed to pull off to begin for you to be able to see them in your life.
Well, there's that debate. There's always that delay. There's always that delay between when you pass the policy and when the policy starts taking hold.
Right, and when it really begins to show promise.
Right.
But as long as every word out of Trump's mouth is a lie, they're just not going to know that. So I'm taking it upon myself right now to tell any of you people who don't like Trump, but you're going to vote for him anyway, please don't. And fact check the things I say. Go to Forbes. That is not a partisan rag. Go to the Hill, not a partisan rag. I'm beginning to think that the New York Times is a partisan rag on the other side.
Man.
That's another.
That's a crazy thing lately.
And as my husband says, well, they are. I mean, come on, they're in business.
Of course.
And if people are going to give them a whole bunch of money to say this or that or the other thing, I don't think they're bought and paid for. Neither is the Washington Post. But I do think they could do a better service to us instead of and they don't ever call Trump out. That's another thing.
Well, that's the thing is,
you want to really know what he said, you need to find out for yourselves.
Right.
Because what he's saying is absolutely nuts. But they don't cover it. The media doesn't cover it. I don't know why.
Well, the money thing.
They don't want to, the money thing. Yeah.
And there's also the horse.
Maybe they don't want to give him, airtime. I don't know.
There's that too, but I think also there's this sense of if they fact check him, then they get called, liberal propaganda or whatever. I mean, they're trying to figure out ways to stay unmarked for partisanship wise.
Yeah.
But when you have somebody who just does nothing but walk around talking nonsense all day long, there has to be somebody who says this is not accurate.
Calls him out.
It's like the J.D. Vance thing, when he got mad because they fact checked him at the debate.
Yes. So you have a problem with fact checking, and you want to vote for those people? What the hell?
Well, and
they don't want to know the truth, though.
Well, and that's the increasing issue is that I feel like, and I think this is true for some of folks on the left too, is that it can be comforting to have people who believe the same thing as you do, saying those things, in public places.
Filling them full of bullshit is another thing entirely. And as most of the media, or a lot of the media, I'll say, they tend to normalize what he's doing. Instead of calling him out, they act like, oh, well, that's...
We talked about Clayton Williams earlier. That's why I was saying, if Clayton Williams existed today as a political force, I don't know that he would be all that outrageous compared to some of these other folks that are out there. I mean, like Marjorie Taylor Greene or whatever.
Thinking we changed the weather. Yeah, we changed the weather. Yeah. All those Democrats who don't have any water on their ranches and fires are burning up their property. Yeah, they did that on purpose.
Yeah, it's almost.
Good God.
But it makes me feel better to know that I'm not the only one who's worried about being here after November. But I'm going to remain optimistic, for the most part, because we don't know yet.
So we don't know a damn thing.
Yeah. So you're
it's so close.
So I know you're doing a lot of activism right now to try to get out the vote. What kinds of things are you doing apart from doing Ann?
I haven't done very much. I talk and you've probably seen this, but on social media, I take these people on and I try to explain in a straightforward, coherent way what they're getting wrong, and I give them my source because social media reaches a whole lot of people.
Sure.
I'm not I'm a pretty strong gal, but I'm not particularly strong enough to knock on doors in Texas summer.
Oh well. Yeah, that's a thankless task anyway. Yeah.
But I don't think it is. I think it does work. I think it may not work here, but it might work here for college.
Yeah.
And it's time for me to get down to the campaign office and start sending postcards out.
Sure.
And because my husband usually works the polls.
Oh, okay.
So he's trying to
I was an election judge.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, I was election judge in Parker County for a while, and kind of back during the Wendy Davis campaign, and
sure.
So we did a lot of. We did a lot of block walking. We did a lot of knocking on doors, and that one was interesting because there were a lot of people who were on the Democratic voter rolls who had actually just gone into the Democratic primary in 2008 to try to keep Obama out. And but so we go and we knock on the door, and it turns out no, actually it's a hardcore Republican. So I got yelled at a lot. But that happens. But I do think
you don't just holler and go home and go,
I mean, it was
I have to do the work.
Well, and it's not my first time getting yelled at, but it's also, I think, it can be intimidating to people to think about when you have election workers who are getting threatened, and you have that kind of intimidation going around. Sometimes it can be difficult for people to say, yes, I want to go do that. I want to go, confront people who are who oppose my candidate. Not confront them, but try to be in the same room with them and hope they don't shoot me. I guess.
Yeah, Wendy, I've known Wendy forever and ever because my career started at Stage West with Jerry Russell, her father. Mm-hmm. So I've known her for ages, and she came to my Dallas Theater Center. She did the talk back at the Dallas Theater Center, and that was so great to see her and to see her so long, and she keeps it up. We've been delegates several times for a Democratic.
Yeah,
including Jesse Jackson way back when, and then we were Hillary delegates, and then we were Obama delegates, and that's boring work sometimes.
It can be,
but it's a necessary process.
Yeah, I was a delegate to the state convention back in 2016, and it was, it's slow going, but sometimes you can pick up on some electricity too. Just kind of people who care enough about it to bother. Even at the county level, I went to the Tarrant County Convention, and it's certainly trepidation. I've been hearing for at least 2 decades that Texas is about to turn blue, and
yes, we have.
And so every time that comes back up again, I kind of go, well, we're going to see. We're going to give it a shot, and I don't know. I know that all red is within a striking distance right now of Cruz, so. Even if that happens, that would be fine. We would be
thrilled.
Yeah.
Because it would make a difference. Well, first of all, we would probably hold the Senate.
Yes, that's the main thing.
And I think Colin is a terrific a candidate. And I wish he had more money. I wish I could have done an for him, another for him, but that didn't work out. But we were talking the other day about how art affects and influences politics. I don't know if you watched Saturday Night Live last night, but Stevie Nicks was on there with her new song, and oh my God, it's just fantastic.
I'll have to check that out.
It's called the Lighthouse, and it is just a really straightforward song about our rights, our rights to say what happens to our own bodies. And abortion rights is health care. That's what the song about. But anyway, I was just stunned at this because, music is one of the main ways, all the way back to Guthrie, Woody Guthrie.
Yeah.
When I was very young and used to hear his labor songs.
Yes.
And I would just get thrills through my toes, about what he was addressing. I just, for some reason, I, like my mother, was born knowing that's wrong, knowing racism is wrong, knowing misogyny is wrong.
Well, it's kind of just basic empathy, I think. When you.
Well, how do they miss that? I don't think Trump has an empathetic bone in his body.
Well, you're kind of born. When you grow up in the society, you either get one of two takes on things. It's either like, okay, everything is tough and everyone's for themselves, so I'm going to be the toughest and take as much as I can for myself. Or you get the message that, well, everything's tough, but the way to make it less tough is for us to, help each other and to make it where it's not as tough. And there's
not refuse to help people who are, he is suggesting now that they refuse to help people who are in democratic states.
Right.
Crises and such.
Yeah.
And of course, then coming right back and saying Biden and Harris are doing that. Which
every accusation is a confession. This is the thing that we learn about that, and that's having known a few narcissists in my life. That's very on brand. They accuse you of doing the thing that they just did.
Projection.
Right. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're up against. But like you said, we're talking about sort of, the role of the arts in and there are people who will argue that there shouldn't be a role for the arts in political and social, movements. However, you go back, again, going back to Woody Guthrie, going back really probably to earlier than that, there always has been, an artistic component to social and political change. Certainly in the civil rights movement there was, and
absolutely. And in the when we saw, I really believe that many more people became politically active when we saw the Vietnam War on our televisions.
Yeah.
And we saw the brutality of it and the senselessness of it, and began to protest. I was in those protests every single opportunity I could get to do that.
Well, and think about it. Yeah.
My parents said, "What are you doing that for?"
Right.
My in-laws, "What are you doing that for?" Well, kids can't. Do you really want to send these young boys that grew up with your son to get killed for nothing? Do you really want to do that? And so, political activity towards change really began to raise its head then.
Yeah.
And so we still do that. And so you can get mad because Taylor Swift has gotten 40,000 people to register to vote. But she's also lost fans. She's also
of course. Oh yeah. And that's the risk you run. I mean, when you think of things from less of a business perspective and more from a humane perspective, then you're gonna alienate some people. I mean, you talk about like kind of seeing things for yourself too, though. I mean, stuff like TikTok has kind of increased that kind of thing. The George Floyd thing, where a lot of people saw the footage, and when they actually saw what had happened, they were horrified by it. Whereas if they just heard a description of it, I think it would have been less acute. But the fact that we're actually seeing, police body cam footage of stuff, and we're actually seeing some of the stuff that's been going down for years, but we just didn't see video of it. That's a lot of what's kind of kickstarted a lot of this activism. So in the same thing, in Gaza right now, we're seeing all of this video coming in, and absent that, it just becomes it's just a piece of a newspaper clipping, and and I do think that era definitely started in Vietnam, where you actually saw the video of this stuff and then the photos coming back. And
these journalists that put their lives on the line to get these stories,
Yeah, and if that's
not necessarily partisan, they don't tell a partisan story.
Yeah,
if they just show the truth, you don't have to.
Right. And that's one of the things that I guess concerns me about when we do have partisan media. That when you have, for instance, Tucker Carlson go run over to interview Vladimir Putin, and basically fanboying over him, you're not really getting that kind of objective look. At
these
things.
people they don't know the news. They don't know what's really going on. And that's so sad. They don't, they watch Fox. Me, I don't. I do not watch partisan. I take in down the middle as much as I can. Sure. And I suggest others do that too. Turn off Fox. Yeah. And so I read The Hill. And but I read Reuters because that is exactly down the middle.
Yeah,
Associated Press.
Exactly right. Reuters, AP. I mean, you're basically just getting the story, and then, if you want opinion on the story after, you know where to find it. But
exactly.
To get the actual story. If you just
watch Fox,
which a lot of people do.
Yes, and that's all they watch, or even worse, OAN, Newsmax. Yeah, and that is, what's his face that owned Fox for the longest time? No, he still does. He's pretty much responsible for what, how come.
Yeah, Murdoch is kind of one of those evil masterminds. And that, when we see the way it's unfolding now, that's kind of what they originally had in mind when they established Fox, was to create that kind of echo chamber. Newt Gingrich was the first one to kind of recognize, the power of C-SPAN, of just being able to just, broadcast these ideas to the world, and it got amped up by having its own network. And for some reason, people not on the right have had a hard time establishing, those types of opposition things.
Mainly because they're a little more honest,
Right. Yeah. And also it's also, it's kind of like herding cats, like like people.
Yes, us liberals are a big tent.
Yeah, herding open-minded people it's much harder to do than people who like to take orders.
To align themselves. Yeah.
But again, I try not to get into tribalism on it. I try to get into like, let's talk about the actual issue and let's see where we land on it. Because very often, even if you have someone who's technically on the other side, if you have an honest conversation with somebody, you can at least find some middle ground. But that you have to make sure that the other person doesn't. Yeah, you have to make sure the other person doesn't think that you're actually a minion of Satan. For trying to get them to do that.
I'm not sure how we do that.
I don't know. It's a tricky bit.
Yeah. Well, speaking about tribalism,
yeah.
Who would have ever? I would never have thought I was going to agree with Liz Cheney on anything. Right?
Right, and I don't,
or Dick Cheney either, and I knew that I would for Romney, and then others too are never Trumpers.
Well, Cheney was enemy number one for me for a long time, and still is in many ways. But he's a war criminal. But but it is crazy. It is crazy that that seen through the lens of the current election, like the fact that that's even too much for him. But again, not to absolve Cheney of his many crimes, but also to just recognize that I think he understands, in the way that maybe somebody like Mitch McConnell understands, that once you actually have a dictator, you don't need Congress, you don't need courts, you don't need all these other people in political positions, because... And
if you have them, they are manned by your yes men.
Right, and so that means all of the people who are not his yes men are on the chopping block, and become, that's the thing that always happens is, and
the military just might. There are lots of veterans who support it, but there are also lots of veterans who
that's the thing. I do have plenty of veteran friends who are very, very non-Trumpy.
They see right through it. Well, I want to close on this.
Yeah.
You do not have to be a liberal or a Democrat to vote for Kamala Harris this time around. Because if you don't, you won't have a Republican Party. And I'm pretty sure that Republicans out there, many, many, many of them, they want their party back.
Right.
Because
I know those people personally.
Not a Republican.
Well, and
he is not.
Yeah, and that's been the case. I know right now longtime Republicans who can't pull the Trump lever because they're just, he stole their party. And so I'm hoping...
listeners, please think about that. Please think beyond, he's my guy because I'm a Republican. Please think beyond that. You've got 3 weeks to really inform yourself about inflation and about fascism and about losing your democracy. You've got time.
And I would recommend, it's a really short read if you read On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder. It kind of tells you sort of the warning signs of impending authoritarianism and fascism. And we're ringing all the bells right now. So where would they find more of your stuff, Libby, if they were wanting to find you on the internet and elsewhere?
You know what? Lots of people. I think actually my Facebook page is open to pretty much everybody, unless I blocked them because they were so obnoxious. And so, you see, a couple of days ago, I did a riff of Anne. It's not in the play, but it's just me riffing as Anne in heaven. And
nice.
And I do this for Democratic get-togethers pretty frequently. Show up as Anne and say, I cannot believe I had to come back here to fix this mess. I'm supposed to be singing with the angels in heaven.
Which is fantastic. I love that.
So you can see that on Facebook.
Okay.
And then if you want to see what I'm famous for, then you can go to IMDb and you'll see all of my credits there.
Yeah.
I've made a ton of things, movies and film in Texas.
Yeah.
And Texas has been good to me in that regard, and I hope to keep doing that until I die. So, look me up.
We're rooting for you. Well, thank you, Libby Villari, for spending time with us, and have a lovely Cowboy game if you can. And
they need to have a lovely game, right? Yeah.
We'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you so much
for having me. I really appreciate it. The time just flew by.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you later. This program is brought to you by Naive Media. Visit thematthewshow.com for info on this and other programs.